There's a Zen principle that will destroy everything you believe about mastery. You've been taught that expertise is the goal, that the more you know, the better you become. But what if I told you that your expertise is the exact thing preventing your next breakthrough? What if the path to your greatest success requires forgetting what you already know? In Japan, Zen masters have a term for this, Shoshin, the beginner's mind. It's the understanding that true mastery isn't about accumulating knowledge. It's about maintaining the openness of a beginner, even when you're an expert. And modern neuroscience has proven something shocking. Experts are often worse at solving problems than beginners because their brains get trapped in familiar patterns. This is called the in-styling effect, and it's destroying your potential right now without you even realizing it. In this video, I'm going to tell you the story of someone who had everything: success, recognition, mastery, but lost it all because they became a prisoner of their own expertise, and how rediscovering Shoshin saved not just their career, but their entire life. If you've ever felt stuck despite being good at what you do, this story will hit different. Before we dive in, comment below, where in your life do you feel trapped by your own knowledge? And subscribe if you want more content that challenges everything you think you know about success.
Meet David Chen. At 32 years old, David was already a legend in the tech world. He built Streamflow, an app that revolutionized how creators manage their content across platforms. The app had 5 million users, $20 million in annual revenue, and David was considered a genius. Tech blogs called him the Mozart of UX design. Investors fought to get meetings with him. Other founders studied his code like scripture. David knew everything about app architecture, user psychology, algorithm optimization, and monetization funnels. He could solve problems in his sleep that made other developers quit. But there was a problem nobody saw coming. David couldn't innovate anymore. Oh, he could optimize. He could refine. He could make Streamflow 2% faster, 3% more efficient. But he couldn't create anything truly new. When his team proposed radical redesigns, David shut them down. "That won't work," he'd say. "I've tried similar approaches before." When younger developers suggested unconventional solutions, David dismissed them. "You don't understand the technical constraints," he'd explain. David wasn't being arrogant. He genuinely believed he was right, because in his mind, he was. His expertise told him what was possible and what wasn't. His experience showed him the correct way to build things. His pattern recognition said, "This is how it's done." But what David didn't realize was that his expertise had become a prison. Every problem he looked at, he saw through the lens of solutions that worked before. Every new challenge was categorized into familiar patterns. Every opportunity was evaluated against past experiences. And this is where the story gets interesting, because David was about to learn a lesson that would destroy his ego and save his life. One day, a 19-year-old intern named Maya joined Streamflow. Fresh out of high school, no formal coding education, just raw curiosity and 3 months of self-teaching. During her first week, Maya was assigned to observe a product meeting. The team was stuck on a major problem. Users were complaining that the app was too complicated, despite having one of the cleanest interfaces in the industry. David had been working on this for months. He'd simplified menus, reduced clicks, streamlined workflows. Nothing worked. The complaints kept coming. Maya raised her hand. "Can I ask a dumb question?" Everyone turned to look at her. David smiled politely. "Of course. No question is dumb." "Why do users need to set up an account before they can see how the app works? Why can't they just play with it first?" The room went silent. David's smile faded. "Because we need user data for personalization. Without an account, we can't deliver customized experiences. This is industry standard, Maya. Every major app does it this way." Maya nodded, looking embarrassed. "Sorry, I'm still learning." The meeting moved on. But that night, David couldn't sleep. Maya's question bothered him, not because it was wrong, but because it was so simple. So obvious, so beginner. And yet in 10 years of building apps, David had never questioned the account-first model. It was just how things were done. 3 days later, David did something he hadn't done in years. He opened up a blank development environment and built a prototype. A version of StreamFlow where users could access 80% of features without creating an account. Just explore, play, experiment. Create an account only when they wanted to save their work. It took him 6 hours to build. The next week, they secretly launched it to a test group of 1,000 new users. The results were shocking. User activation increased by 340%. Complaints about complexity dropped by 67%. Paid conversions went up by 89%. And David realized something that terrified him. He had become blind. Blind to simple solutions because he was too busy being an expert. Blind to possibilities because he knew the right way. Blind to innovation because his brain automatically filtered ideas through past patterns. This phenomenon has a name in psychology. It's called the Einstellung effect. When your expertise prevents you from seeing better solutions, when your knowledge becomes cognitive quicksand, when your mastery turns into a mental prison. And David wasn't alone. Studies show that chess grandmasters often miss obvious winning moves because they're looking for complex strategies. Medical experts misdiagnose because they default to familiar conditions instead of considering rare ones. Experienced designers create complicated solutions that beginners would solve simply. Expertise doesn't just give you knowledge, it also gives you blindness. And David was about to discover that the cure for expert blindness had been hiding in plain sight for over 1,000 years, in a philosophy called Shoshin. But before we get there, I need to tell you about David's fall. Because sometimes you have to lose everything to see clearly.
6 months after Maya's breakthrough question, David thought he'd learned his lesson. He started encouraging beginner perspectives in meetings. He asked junior developers for input. He even created a channel called Dumb Questions Welcome. But deep down, David was still operating from expertise. He was listening to beginners, but filtering their ideas through his expert framework, taking their inputs, but improving them with his knowledge, appreciating their perspective, but ultimately trusting his own judgment more. And then StreamFlow lost their biggest deal ever. Tech giant Corp wanted to acquire StreamFlow for $200 million. The deal was nearly finalized. David and his team flew to San Francisco for the final presentation. Everything was perfect. The pitch deck was flawless, the demo was smooth, the numbers were undeniable. But then the tech giant CEO asked a question. David, what's your vision for StreamFlow in 5 years? What's the next revolutionary feature? David smiled confidently. He'd prepared for this. He launched into a 15-minute presentation about advanced AI personalization, blockchain integration for creator rights, and predictive analytics for content optimization. Buzzwords, features, complexity, technical sophistication. When he finished, the room was quiet. The CEO leaned back. That all sounds impressive, but can I be honest with you? David nodded. I have a 14-year-old daughter. She's a creator, uses your app every day. Last week I asked her what she wanted from StreamFlow. You know what she said? She said she wishes it felt more like hanging out with friends and less like managing a business. She said she wishes it was fun again. The CEO paused. I don't hear fun in your vision, David. I hear data, I hear complexity, but I don't hear joy. The meeting ended shortly after. 2 days later, Tech Giant Corp acquired StreamFlow's competitor for $180 million instead. David was devastated. Not because of the money, because of the realization he'd lost the deal because he'd stopped being a creator and become a technician. He'd stopped thinking about joy and started thinking about metrics. He'd stopped seeing the app through the eyes of a user and started seeing it through the eyes of an expert. And the worst part? He didn't know how to fix it. He tried forcing creativity. Nothing came. He tried brainstorming wild ideas. They all felt fake. He tried looking at competitor apps for inspiration. Everything seemed derivative. For the first time in his career, David felt completely lost. Not because he lacked knowledge, but because he had too much. His mind was so full of right answers that there was no room for discovery. So full of best practices that there was no space for experimentation. So full of expertise that there was no room for wonder. He had become the very thing he swore he'd never be. He had become rigid. He was sitting in his apartment one night, staring at his laptop screen, when his phone buzzed. It was Maya. "Hey, I know you're going through a tough time. My grandmother is visiting from Kyoto this week. She's a Zen tea ceremony master. Would you like to meet her? I think you two might have an interesting conversation." David almost said no. What could a tea ceremony master possibly teach him about tech entrepreneurship? But something made him say yes. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the universe pushing him toward exactly what he needed. 3 days later, David found himself sitting on a cushion in Maya's apartment, across from a 78-year-old woman named Keiko. Keiko spoke limited English, so Maya translated. But what happened in that conversation changed David's life forever. Because Keiko didn't talk about tea. She talked about Shoshin, the beginner's mind. And everything David thought he knew about expertise was about to be shattered.
Keiko prepared tea in complete silence. Every movement was deliberate but not rigid, focused but not tense, expert but not mechanical. When she finally handed David his cup, she said something in Japanese. Maya translated. She says, "How many years have you been doing what you do?" "About 12 years, David answered. Keiko nodded and spoke again. She asks, "Are you better now than when you started?" "Of course," David said. "I know so much more now. I can solve problems I couldn't even understand back then." Keiko smiled and spoke longer this time. Maya translated. She says, "Knowledge is like water in a cup. When you start, your cup is empty, so every drop fills it with something new. But as your cup fills, there's less room for new water. Eventually, your cup overflows and new water just spills away. You think you're drinking more, but you're actually drinking less." David sat with that for a moment. "So you're saying I know too much?" Keiko shook her head and spoke again. Maya translated. "No, she's saying your relationship with what you know has changed. When you started, you approached everything with Shoshin, beginner's mind. You were curious. You questioned everything. You had no assumptions about what was possible. But now, you approach everything with expert mind. You're efficient. You know the patterns. You have confidence in your knowledge. But you've lost something. You've lost the ability to see what's actually there instead of what you expect to be there." David felt something crack open inside him. Keiko continued speaking, and Maya translated. "In Zen, we say that the master's mind must remain a beginner's mind. Not because the master doesn't know anything, but because the master knows that true seeing requires empty space. A cup already full cannot receive new tea. A mind already certain cannot receive new truth. Shoshin doesn't mean forgetting what you know. It means holding what you know lightly, like water in an open palm, not a closed fist. It means approaching every moment like it's your first time, even if you've done it 1,000 times before. It means staying curious even when you're confident. It means questioning even when you're certain. It means being willing to not know even when everyone expects you to have the answer." David felt tears welling up because he finally understood what had happened to him. He'd spent 12 years filling his cup, and now his cup was so full that nothing new could enter. Every problem he encountered, he immediately poured it through his existing framework. Every idea that came to him, he instantly compared it to past patterns. Every solution he considered, he filtered it through known constraints. He wasn't creating anymore. He was curating from a mental library of past solutions. He wasn't innovating. He was recombining familiar patterns. He wasn't discovering. He was recognizing. And that's why Maya's simple question had unlocked a breakthrough. Because she had Shoshin. Her cup was empty. She could see what was actually there because she had no expectations about what should be there. How do I get it back? How do I rediscover beginner's mind when I already know so much? Keiko smiled and said something that Maya translated. She says, you don't get it back. You never lost it. It's always there underneath the noise of expertise. You just have to become quiet enough to hear it again. David looked confused. Keiko gestured to the tea. When I prepare tea, I've done it 10,000 times. I know every step, every temperature, every timing. I could do it in my sleep. But every time I prepare tea, I do it like it's my first time. I notice the water. I observe the leaves. I watch the steam. I don't think about what should happen. I pay attention to what is happening. This is Shoshin. Not forgetting your knowledge, but not letting your knowledge block your perception. Keiko picked up David's empty cup and poured more tea. Then she said something else. Maya translated. She says, your expertise is not your enemy. Your attachment to your expertise is. When you hold your knowledge loosely, it serves you. When you hold it tightly, it traps you. The beginner's mind is always available. You just have to choose it. Even now, especially now. David drank his tea slowly. For the first time in months, his mind felt quiet. Not empty, quiet. And in that quietness, something began to emerge. Not a thought, not a solution. Just space. Space for possibility. Space for curiosity. Space for not knowing. And in that space, David felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt excited to create again. Not to solve, not to optimize, not to prove his expertise, but to create like a child creates, for the pure joy of making something new.
David left Maya's apartment that night with homework. Keiko had given him a challenge. For 30 days, approach one thing each day as if you've never done it before. It could be anything: making coffee, writing code, having a conversation, taking a shower, driving to work. The task itself didn't matter. What mattered was the mindset. See it fresh. Notice details you've stopped noticing. Question assumptions you've stopped questioning. Be curious about the familiar. David started the next morning with his morning routine. He'd made coffee the same way for 10 years. Same machine, same beans, same process. But this time, he approached it with Shoshin. He actually looked at the coffee grounds instead of just scooping them. He noticed their texture, their smell, their color variation. He paid attention to the sound of water heating instead of scrolling his phone. He watched the coffee drip instead of walking away. And something strange happened. He realized the water temperature was probably too hot. He'd never thought about it before because this is just how you make coffee. But approaching it with beginner's mind, he noticed the coffee tasted slightly bitter, over-extracted. He lowered the temperature by 15 degrees. The coffee tasted better. It seemed trivial, but it wasn't, because David realized, if I've been making coffee wrong for 10 years and never noticed, what else am I doing on autopilot that could be better? He brought this mindset to work. In a code review, instead of immediately identifying problems based on his past experience, he asked questions. Why did you structure it this way? What were you trying to solve? What would happen if we tried X instead? and something amazing happened. The junior developer explained a reasoning David had never considered. It wasn't wrong, according to best practices. It was different. And in that difference was a possibility David's expert mind had automatically filtered out. He implemented the alternative approach. It worked better than his correct solution. David started noticing his expert patterns everywhere. In product meetings, he'd catch himself about to say, "That won't work," and instead say, "I've never seen that done before. Let's prototype it and see what happens." In design reviews, he'd catch himself defaulting to proven layouts and instead ask, "What would this look like if we had no constraints? What would a beginner try?" In strategy sessions, he'd catch himself optimizing existing features and instead ask, "What would this product be if we started from scratch today?" And the results were shocking. Within 4 weeks, StreamFlow had 3 new experimental features in testing that broke every rule David believed in, and 2 of them were outperforming the core product features. But the real breakthrough happened when David applied Shoshin to his personal life. He'd been in a relationship with his girlfriend Sarah for 6 years. They were comfortable. They had routines. They knew each other. Or so David thought. One night, instead of their usual dinner and Netflix routine, David approached the evening with Shoshin. He looked at Sarah like he was seeing her for the first time. He noticed how her eyes crinkled when she smiled. Had they always done that? He asked her questions he'd never thought to ask. What would you do tomorrow if you had no consequences? He listened to her answers without planning his response, just listening, like a beginner would. And Sarah noticed. "You're different lately," she said. "More present. What changed?" David told her about Shoshin, about Keiko, about rediscovering beginner's mind. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think I've been approaching our relationship with expert mind too. Like I already know you, like I already know us, like I've figured out how this works." She looked at him. "What if we both tried this? What if we approached each other like it's our first date every week?" They did, and their relationship transformed, not because anything was broken, but because they stopped assuming they knew everything about each other and started discovering each other again. This is the power of Shoshin. It's not about becoming less skilled. It's about becoming less rigid. It's not about forgetting what you know. It's about not letting what you know block what you could discover. It's not about being naive. It's about being open. And David was about to discover that Shoshin wasn't just a philosophical concept. It was backed by hardcore neuroscience. And that's when everything clicked.
David became obsessed with understanding why Shoshin worked. He dove into neuroscience research, and what he found was mind-blowing. When you become an expert at something, your brain creates neural pathways, shortcuts. This is called automaticity. It's why you can drive a car without consciously thinking about every movement. It's efficient. But there's a dark side. Research on the expert blind spot shows that experts literally see less than beginners. In one study, chess grandmasters were shown chess positions with obvious winning moves, but they missed them because their brains automatically activated familiar patterns and filtered out alternatives. Their expertise made them blind. Another study on the Einstellung effect showed that people with more knowledge solved problems slower than beginners because they were stuck trying solutions that worked before, instead of exploring new approaches. The expert brain says, "I know how to solve this. Use pattern X." The beginner brain says, "I don't know how to solve this. Let me explore." And often, the beginner finds better solutions because they're not constrained by knowing what should work. But here's the fascinating part. The research also shows you can override this. When experts were instructed to approach this like you've never seen it before, their brain activation patterns changed.
The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for open-ended exploration, lit up again. The pattern recognition areas quieted down, and their problem-solving improved. In other words, Shoshin isn't just philosophy. It's applied neuroscience. It's deliberately activating beginner neural networks even when expert neural networks are available. And David realized he could use this. He created a new ritual for his team. Before every product meeting, everyone had to complete this sentence. If I knew nothing about our product, I would wonder. It forced beginner's mind. It forced curiosity. It forced open exploration before expert analysis. The results were immediate. Feature ideas that would have been dismissed in 30 seconds were now explored for 30 minutes, and some of them were brilliant. 3 months after meeting Keiko, David's team launched StreamFlow 3.0. It wasn't an optimization of the old product. It was a complete reimagining, built with beginner's mind, designed around joy, not efficiency, focused on exploration, not control. The interface looked like nothing else in the market, because they stopped asking, what do users expect, and started asking, what would delight someone seeing this for the first time? The feature set broke industry standards, because they stopped asking, what's best practice, and started asking, what would we build if we had no rules? The user experience was polarizing. Some people hated it, but the people who loved it became obsessed, and that obsession spread. Within 6 months, StreamFlow 3.0 had 12 million users. Within a year, tech giant Corp called again. This time, they offered $380 million. David sold the company, not because of the money, but because he'd learned what he needed to learn. At the final board meeting, one investor asked David, what was the turning point? What made 3.0 successful when you were stuck before? David thought about all the technical answers he could give. The UX innovations, the algorithm improvements, the market timing. But instead, he said, I met a 78-year-old tea ceremony master who taught me that my greatest strength had become my greatest weakness, and that the cure was learning to see like a beginner again, even when I was an expert. The room was silent. Then the investor laughed. That's the most Silicon Valley thing I've ever heard. Eastern philosophy saves tech company. But David didn't laugh, because he knew it wasn't a metaphor. It was the truth. Shoshin had saved him. Not just his company. Him. Here's what David learned, and what I want you to understand. Your expertise is valuable, but your attachment to your expertise is dangerous. The more you know, the more you need beginner's mind. The more skilled you become, the more you need to protect your ability to see freshly. The more experience you have, the more you need to question your assumptions. Because mastery without Shoshin becomes rigidity. Knowledge without openness becomes blindness. Expertise without curiosity becomes irrelevance. Today, David runs a small creative studio. He works with 5 people. They build weird, experimental apps that sometimes fail and sometimes go viral. And every Monday morning, they start their week the same way. They sit in silence for 5 minutes. Then David asks, what would we try this week if we knew nothing about how things are supposed to be done? And they explore, with beginner's mind, with Shoshin. And that's the invitation for you. Whatever you're expert at, business, art, relationships, your career, approach it tomorrow like it's your first day. Not because you don't know anything, but because you know that fresh eyes see possibilities that expert eyes miss. Your expertise is your foundation, but Shoshin is your freedom. Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary samurai, wrote that, in all things, have no preferences. He wasn't saying don't have opinions. He was saying don't let your opinions block reality. See what is, not what you expect. That's Shoshin. That's beginner's mind. That's the paradox of mastery. The moment you think you've mastered something, you've stopped growing.
The moment you hold your knowledge lightly, you become limitless. So stop being trapped by what you know. Start seeing with beginner's eyes, and discover that your greatest breakthroughs are waiting on the other side of your expertise. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to this channel. More content like this is coming. Leave a like. Drop a comment. Tell me where you need Shoshin in your life. Thank you for watching. And remember, approach everything like it's your first day. Question everything like you know nothing. See freshly, even when you're an expert. That's Shoshin. That's freedom. That's the path. See you in the next video.